One of the things about leadership, and your listenership will know this, is that there's gazillion books out there on leadership. And a lot of them are anecdotal. If you stop randomly someone on the street and ask them, what do we know to be true about leadership? I don't know what they would say, actually. I think part of the problem is this kind of generic, generalist idea that you just create a one-size-fits-all person, as if management is just a pair of gloves that you put on and you just, play the piano wherever it is you happen to be. I mean, that's just bullshit. Really, people who are very good at the core business of their organization, at the very top of the organization, inspire, motivate, set a standard for the organization. And ultimately what you want there, which is the most important thing, is...
You've been publishing for a long time, great data, great articles, and you've been teaching. What led you to your quest of truly understanding leadership?
Yeah, very, very nice question. So it did come from, again, experiential stuff. I worked when I did my undergraduate degree at LSE. I was going to do a PhD straight away and I had no money. So I took a job with the guy who was the director of LSE, a very well-known sociologist, and worked with him for 3 years. And then I went to Chicago for a year, and then I came back and worked with an American who had been at Johns Hopkins, who was head of this university, Warwick. And I observed differences in both their leadership styles and with Chicago. The people who were really actively involved in research behaved differently in their leadership roles than this guy who was at Warwick, who'd given up his research very early in his career to go into the administration. And so I thought about that, about the differences and the different preferences that they had in their behaviors and everything. And that led me to my PhD, which was to ask the question, who should lead research universities? Should they be outstanding scholars, or are they mainly good managers? And I found through longitudinal data and cross-sectional data and the research is published in journals and also in Princeton University Press book. And I found that the best universities in the world are led by top researchers. And this isn't one point in time. This isn't just, causality doesn't go, Harvard gets great and then bungs a top researcher on it. This really does. You can see it longitudinally that good researchers, make their universities top research universities. And I found that across many different institutions now. And then I thought, okay, this is an interesting pattern. How much can I replicate this? One of the things about leadership, and your listenership will know this, is that there's gazillion books out there on leadership. And a lot of them are anecdotal, often taken, I have to say, from, the big man's perspective, this kind of, the leader's voice, they tell his story, etc. And increasingly there are more books with more data. But at the time I felt, there aren't really that many books that and I say this a lot, if you stop randomly someone on the street and ask them, what do we know to be true about leadership? I don't know what they would say, actually. So I thought I wanted to try and work hard to see if this pattern that I found with universities is replicatable, generalizable in other settings. In other words, how reliable is this as a measure of good leadership across different sectors? Because that's really what matters, right? Because people tend to get stuck in their own little world and they go, but healthcare is really different. It's really unique. It's really complex. They love saying it's really complex, or, oh no, but IT, Google, whatever it is really, different. No, they're not actually. Humans are humans. Maybe when it comes to AI, it might be different, but humans are humans. And actually, it's humans still currently who mainly are employed in workplaces. And humans are very, very similar. There may be differences in some patterns. Maybe someone who's a scientist might behave slightly different than someone in another field. But on the whole, we're pretty predictable now. We know quite a lot about humans. And we know that humans want to be managed by someone who really understands what they do. And that's the main finding of the research, is that people who are very good at the core business of their organization, at the very top of the organization, inspire, motivate, set a standard for the organization. And ultimately what you want there, which is the most important thing, because all of us, maybe you don't, but all of us in the kind of, regular work world have a line manager. And the line manager affects your work, your performance, your own productivity more than anything else. In fact, in our own studies, we have found that your boss matters to your job satisfaction, which matters more to your productivity than anything else. Double the amount of your pay. Double the amount of your pay. That's an extraordinary thing. So that's kind of that's I don't know if I veered off at all on that, but
No,
that's
that's good. That's
essentially
good. Yeah, I founded a financial services company 8 years ago now. And we have I've run that as a CEO. So, ultimately I completely understand the protocol. It's interesting because I'm curious of how you're seeing the generations change. And so what I mean by that is all the research that I would imagine shows what you've just talked about, how the expertise and the credibility of the leader matters so much to the person that they're leading. But I'm finding in this next generation who that human is matters so much for them. If I as a leader don't understand more about the person working for me's life, not just their career, I'm doing a major disservice to them. I feel like that's probably how it's always been, but it seems to be really important to millennials, and I guess, is it Gen Z is the next one. So, we have an assortment of people that work for us and with us, and there seems to be a little bit of where Gen X and the baby boomers were so in tune with the rules and the structure and the credibility. The next generation tends to take lesser jobs. They want to know you care. They want to know you're making an impact. Like, that's been our experience, but I'm interested in what research shows.
fascinating. That is fascinating. I mean, to be honest, in terms of the generations, I can't differentiate in my data, particularly the difference in the generations. Now, I know anecdotally, naturally, I live in the world, I work in the world, I know that things have changed. Millennials, Gen Z, I know that law firms pull their hair out because they were, the new generation of lawyers won't do what, etc. I mean, we all
Right.
know that, and we know that there's been a big change, and COVID exacerbated that, I'm sure, as well. I mean, I suppose, yes, they may want you to think about them more. I know that well-being has become a much bigger thing, the concept of well-being and everything. And, for us, it was, well, for me, I'm older than you, but it was slightly different. I still think, funnily enough, that ultimately, even though they may not be aware of this, and this is an interesting thing about the generations, is that I don't know what you were like when you were kind of 18, 19, but I was a cocky wench. I mean, you think you know it all. No, I want revolution and we're going to change the world. It's all going to happen like this, blah, blah, blah. And you're an arrogant son of a bee. And, and then you grow up and you realize, God, I knew nothing at that age. And I think one of the things about the younger generation at the moment, and there was interesting research about this actually, that the young generation, a lot of them want to stay at home rather than come into the office. But what they don't realize is that that's actually really harming their career. And there is evidence to show that it is really harming their career. Now, they think they know what's best for them, because we always do when we're young. We're young, arrogant, we're cocky, and we take risks. That's why the reason we're like that is because you want to take risks, and you have to take risks when you're young, because you're not going to take so many when you get older. So that in some ways, it's about meeting them halfway. We also have to say to them, you think you know what's best for you. We all think we know what's best for us when we're very young, but actually, by not coming into the office, by not learning from these other people around you, by not thinking about what the future may hold. Now, one of the things about Credible, the book, and the research is that I think experts, and it's all about core business experts, but I think experts are going to have a kind of renaissance. They're going to come back with AI, with climate change. I mean, AI is particularly interesting, I think, because we're really going to, only experts are really going to understand the algorithms. And if we're all scared about how that's going to affect our lives, we're going to rely on them even more. And I think in some ways, young people also staying at home or not wanting to be present in the workplace, I worry about them, because I also think AI may be the replacement for them if they're not there and they're not learning all this stuff, because they will be easily reproducible, if that doesn't sound too simplistic. And that worries me. So I would say I get what they're saying, but I also think we as older people have to say, we have to turn to the evidence. If you don't just believe me as an older person who go, you're just an old bitch, what do you know? Let's look at some evidence and just think the evidence is showing that if you don't really commit to this, and it may put you in uncomfortable situations, and we may have uncomfortable conversations with you, because the only way you learn in life is through uncomfortable conversations and actually adapting your behavior. Now, the young people are more wise than I was in some ways at that age, but I still think they're not as wise as they think they are. And I think there's evidence to support that. And that's not, I don't mean to be unsupportive. I don't know what you think about that.
No, I think it's great. Look, first of all, I think there's a couple of correlations here. Number one, when we're young, I can completely relate. I don't want the 18-year-old Scott version to be introduced to the this is the 45-year-old version, and it's a much more refined version. That version was a poor representative of who I would become. Number two, I think that at 18 to 25, maybe even longer now, because of the way that we're coddling children a lot more. Like you had to grow up quicker. We had to grow up quicker. You could go to India at 23. I did travel out of the country at 18. Like, these were things that I was prepared for. I believe that we have a mentality when we're young of taking from the world. And when you're taking from the world, you feel like you're winning when you're staying at home. You feel like you're doing the least amount of work, but getting the most credit. And you can just continue to take from the world. And then you realize that when you flip the switch to give to the world of yourself all that you have a change. You have a change in your career. You have a change in your perspective. You have a change in how people receive you. You have a change in your success. And it all comes from that flip of a switch that says, hey, I need to give what I'm great at. And the only other point I would make is, you mentioned why being in the office is so powerful. This is so important. It's the power of the pop-in. This is what I call, it's like parenting. I have two boys. They're now almost 15 and 18. And I could tell you that if I try to correct them when they were super young, later in the day, after something happened, it doesn't help. So if we're trying to correct course, the greatest way to correct course is to do it in the moment. So when someone answers the phone and they handle a client the wrong way, if I can come in and say, Amanda, listen, I don't want you to just ask if you can help that person. I want you to ask how you can help that person. See, the change of one word can change the way that individual is receiving you. So if you're coming up closed, they don't want to answer you. But if you come open to anything they need, they're more apt to build a relationship with you. And that can only happen with a pop-in. But if you're at home and you're just going through the motions, everything is it's old and antiquated and will eventually lead to your replacement.
Absolutely.
So,
but the other side of that, which is so interesting, and it's happened actually in our workplace recently, I won't mention any names, but the other side of that is that if you're in the office and you're hearing these things happening all the time, you're hearing these kind of, someone's giving you a little bit of advice or whatever, or chipping in like that, it's also building up you hearing these, what we call difficult conversations. And they may not be that difficult actually, but they are really difficult. When you're in this little safe kind of home area where there's only you and your pussycat, no one is challenging you at all, then when someone actually says, could you change it like this? Suddenly you have a kind of psycho crisis and then your well-being collapse, and then you're on leave from blah, blah, blah. And that we see. I mean, there is, I don't mean to be cruel, but some young people are incredibly delicate about these things. And this is stuff that, I'm not saying we want to get the beatings that we might have had years ago, but, we've gone a long way. I mean, as a woman, we're coming up to, International Women's Day, as a feminist, we've come a long way. We've come a long way around sexuality. We've come a long way around identity, all those kinds of things. But, we just don't want to lose we want to build up a strong outer casing, and we have to take on life and to really, as you say, max life. And that requires hearing little adjustments all the way along. If we just don't want to hear those and just spend time with our cat or our dog at home in the safety of nothing, I mean, we're just going to end up with this kind of porous skin that's never going to protect us against anything. And the world is not going to get easier. It's going to get harder.
Yeah, and it goes, I think this leads us right to your research, and that is, if I flip that and I take it from the other direction, which is, as a leader, my job has to include being present. My job has to include understanding those little conversations, being the one to have them occasionally, being the one to actually listen and learn and be available for the 5-minute pop in, the open door policy. One of the things that really matters is it goes both ways. I
Yeah.
can't effectively lead, and I do this all the time. I went in, you get to a point where people are booking your schedule and you have no pockets, no gaps. And when I'm in the lunchroom, the other day I was sitting in the lunchroom and I had we built our office to where there's this open area, and there were 5 or 6 people all sitting and having lunch, and I sat in there for probably about 30 minutes longer than I was allotted to in the schedule, and there was something I pushed off because of it. And when I came back, my assistant said, "Hey, you really need to come back in." I said, "No, my number one job, I'm not in the office enough. When I'm here, I have to have a pulse of what's going on. I have to communicate with everybody. I have to listen. And if I don't do that, I lose my effectiveness as a leader." And she smiled and she was like, "Okay, all right, fair. I'll move it then." So, we have
Absolutely.
these, but she's doing her job and I'm
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
mine, and I
Yeah, yeah.
appreciate it. But I also feel like it goes both ways. And I imagine research probably shows that
Yeah, and
that's an
particularly,
efficient way.
I mean, the thing about you is you are an expert leader, which is probably why I'm on your, honored to be on your podcast. And
Thank
that
you.
can have, what's interesting about experts as well is that they, and this is why we train them actually in leadership management, because you sound like you've learned this or you're a natural, I don't know. But sometimes experts who start their own business up or who have just, focused in on one area and really know it can become a bit arrogant. They can have a bit of hubris. They think, I'm good at this, so I'm probably bloody good at everything. And they're not good at listening necessarily, which is why when we train, I run a course for doctors, and the first thing we do is slam that mirror in their face, and it's all about behaviors and stuff. So, yes, as you say, absolutely, it's a two-way thing. You have to, and that means the thing that I think you have got, which sounds really admirable for an expert, is you have the humility to know that you need to listen to them, you need to be there and hear them, because that's often something that's lacking in experts, because they have kind of developed this expertise. Now, if you run a business and you're sensible and you know that the generations are different, it seems to me like you've adapted extraordinarily well to doing that, to actually recognizing that you have to be there for them and that they are slightly different to maybe a previous generation that you work with. But that's amazing, and that is really commendable. And yes, the research absolutely supports that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think sometimes it's just adding a human touch. And so what I would say is, um, I particularly remember a moment where I'm walking in the office and one of my older employees makes a comment under their breath to me as I'm walking up, that about the younger generation constantly leaving for coffee, and them saying, "You have an espresso machine, a Keurig, you have top quality coffee, and you pay for everything, yet people still leave multiple times for coffee." And the funny part was, they were leaving for me. And so, like, they got smart. The younger generation always asked me, "Hey, do you want a cold brew?" And I always want an afternoon cold brew. So I say yes. So I allow that to happen. Yes, I know they're leaving multiple times a day, but then I also, later on in that day, I stepped into her office and I said, "Hey, just a heads up, I also agree with your logic and your mindset. I come from the same school. I would never waste any money on anything when it was free in the office. Like, we just don't get it. But the
No.
reality is, if we don't grow with youth and we're not flexible and we don't change, we will die as a company. And so just know that while I admire your logic and your mindset and relate to it more, I also appreciate the fact the next generation is willing to ask me if I want a coffee, and have actually taken the time to understand that I enjoy that. And so maybe they're manipulating me, maybe they're not. but I don't care because I'm providing that freedom for them to really do those things. It's just an example
Yeah, yeah.
of, I think, the human touch. And when I read the book and I looked at some of your examples, Home Depot, some of the failed leadership examples, right? Especially early on in the book, I couldn't help but think that so many of these leaders come in from a different industry or a different path. And I'm not against because I'm an entrepreneur, I know you don't like this, but I'm not against the outside the box mentality. Like, if it's the right way, I feel like it's possible. But what I felt like as I read that is so many of them came in with that ego, like they know how to run something. And what they're not listening to is the operations people, the people that do the job every day. And that was what I took from that. And I'll let you speak to that for a minute. I just wanted to set that up.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely the point of the book. It's about if you are going to come in from outside, and funnily enough, in the paperback in the UK, I'm adding a little bit is if you're non-expert, what do you do? But I think part of the problem is it's not just. I mean, I do think. I mean, you fit the data perfectly. I mean, no matter what you say, you fit the data perfectly. You're an entrepreneur. You set up your own business. You are in all of our studies. You are more likely to be successful, and your staff are more likely to be happy working with you. Productivity. You fit all of that. I don't know about the detail of your other business, of course, but yeah. I mean I think the main thing is if you're coming in from outside, well, what happened was the MBA culture basically, and we have MBAs, and MBAs are really important degrees, but the problem was that this kind of generalist idea of that you just create a one size fits all degree and a one size fits all person, as if every single organization in the world is the same, as if management is just a pair of gloves that you put on and you just, play the piano wherever it is you happen to be. I mean, that's just bullshit. I mean, it's
Yeah.
completely doesn't make sense at all. I mean, someone who's a head of a school came in and tried to run your business, I'm sure it would not work very well. And I'm sure the employees wouldn't be very happy. So it's not about being closed down to outside stuff. Absolutely open to outside stuff. But I think it's better that you pull that outside stuff and sieve it through you. You select it, you bring in the outside things, and it goes through you. Now, I think if you are going to have an outside person, yeah, you need a hell of a lot of humility. You need to know what you don't know. And the people in those failed organizations came in with their big MBAs from their top schools, and they'd gone from one organization to the next. Their salaries, the CEOs that move around from organization to organization, they have the biggest salaries because they renegotiate every time they go, and they are associated with the least well-performing organizations. And I really hope that hits home now, because it's shareholders that are paying for all of that, and it's us that are all losing out on that. So it's not to say that I'm closed down to outside, because a lot of people say to me, oh, how can an insider know what's going on outside, and you want outsiders to bring in the information? And it's just a load of crap. I mean, okay, so your kid's had broken their leg. You want some great ideas. What are you going to do? Go and get the local engineer in your car and get him to come and fix your kid's leg? I don't think so. Somehow, you want the person who understands that to be able to go out and get the latest kind of healthcare knowledge or whatever it happens to be. But you have to be in the know from the start to know what you want to take in from outside, and I think that's the point, actually.
I think it's a great point. And I also can see the value of different roles in a business. And I think that there are leaders that, because they're a leader, they start to diminish everybody else and everybody else's role inside the organization. And that's the very opposite effect that it should have on them. It should almost become, I responded to an email the other day, an example, and I immediately said something. I was like, no, we're not going to do that. And I don't like it. But then I came down 2 lines later and I said, if I'm off on this and I'm missing something, please help me understand. Because what I'm saying is, I'm adamantly for what we need to be doing. And I think that you guys are missing it because you're overwhelmed. And it was a management decision. And they were overwhelmed. Because they were overwhelmed, they were assuming everybody underneath of them was overwhelmed. And while I believe that it's possible, it didn't matter because the end client was who we were serving, and they're not overwhelmed. They're
Yeah.
underwhelmed.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting dynamic, but I think that I've been in enough of these situations where it's handled in a different capacity and someone says, no, I said this and that's just the way it is. And if your leadership team, your management has the ability to give advice, to break it and rebuild it all the time, which that's the beauty of an entrepreneur. When you build something from the bottom, you're always willing to break it and rebuild it if you're smart, because if you don't, it won't be viable into
Yeah.
the future.
So,
So
so a question for you then, Scott, is the mindset that we talked about young people. How much of that is that kind of rubbed off on you? So how much is it possible for the sort of the attitudes of the young who might be a bit more sensitive than maybe, some of us were, might be more likely to say things than maybe certainly my generation people may have been when they were young, whatever. How much does that kind of steer you in the way that you are? So how much has it made you more, I don't know, have kind of more sensitivity, listening to people, active listening, reflection, all that kind of stuff, which is getting a bit jargony, but we still really
yeah.
value it. And second question is, at what point do you draw the line as well, say with the new young attitude? At what point where do we draw a line, or how do we meet the middle? That I think those things are, yeah.
Well, the first thing I think that I had to pay attention to is that just because I was doing all these things from an impact perspective, I was doing a poor job early on of share. As our organization grew, I assumed everybody knew what we were doing. Okay. And so one of the things the young people, I'm going to tell you something I learned from them, is that I wasn't bringing them in enough to the things. Like as we grew, I was, I run a wine festival for charity that I started from the bottom, and I have all these things that we're doing in the community that are pretty big impact things. I've been on the board of the Boys and Girls Club, for 20 years, and these are things that are really important to me and that our company has been engaged and involved in. But as we grew, one of the younger employees came to me and was like, hey, I feel like we could be doing so much more. And at first I was kind of like, okay, well, with what and with what time? And then I just realized it was a matter of communication. And so it was a matter of letting them get more engaged and involved, and allowing to pour more into what they found to be important, not just what I found was important. And so that was a very important thing from an empathy and sensitivity side. Um, I've always been extremely wear my emotion on my sleeve and authentic. If in today's world, if I have a weakness, it could be that I expose myself because I'm having honest conversations, and I would be so honest with you and so open that that can sometimes be something the younger generation will use. So the older generation, if you did that with them, once they opened up to you, they were very grateful. You'll often get a text or a call later. The younger generation will come to you open. You will take them to a deeper level than they even thought was possible. Then they'll feel super uncomfortable and exposed. And that's where I've had to be um, less open sometimes with the younger generation and more open with the older generation, and help each other kind of close the gaps. One thing that I found to be very successful is during COVID, we got some complaints that some of our offices felt like they were outside the box because they were working from home, or they were in an office where nobody was at and people weren't coming into the office as much, and so everyone's felt siloed and alone. So we started doing a Monday morning huddle, which was just a check-in where everybody we'd have a Zoom, and it started out with like 5 to 7 people. Today it's like 30 people on a Zoom, and we each have our boxes, and we just spend 30 to 40 minutes every Monday morning from 9 to 9:30, even 9:45 if it needs to be. Still, right now, we've been doing it. We have not stopped. And everybody goes through an iteration where they complain. Like they'll be like, oh, we got to do this meeting. And I'm like, it's not a meeting, because there's not a meeting where we're talking about our own lives. Because I'm coming in and saying, hey, who did something worth sharing this weekend? and we're getting wins, personal wins, marriages, proposals, like kids stuff, like life things that are happening on our huddles. And then on Fridays, we do the same thing, and except Friday is wins and challenges for the work week. So Monday is about life, and we start our week off from 9 to 9:30. As a leader, if we can show that life comes first right out of the gate, that was a way that I brought the generations together. The older people struggled with sharing. The younger people were very, very oversharing. And so it was kind of like, now everybody's kind of like, oh, well, some people won't share for 3 or 4 weeks, and then other people will share every week. And so, that I felt has been really good, and then the wins and challenges allow each other to celebrate each other. So, it's a chance for me to say, "Wow, Amanda, you did an amazing job. I just wanna say thank you so much," or "Thank God for the next generation, because I don't know how to convert a PDF at all." And, little stupid things like that, but everybody feels like they're winning that way. And so, I hope that answers your question, because I
Yeah,
think
no,
it's a
that's
great
very
question.
well done. So why haven't you ever done that face to face then? Because that, to me, face to face equivalent to that would be amazing, actually.
Yeah, we do it face to face. So one thing we do is that happens in one of our offices. Let's say 14 or 15 people are all in one space, so they're all in one room, and then everybody else is just for satellite offices across the country. And so,
Okay.
but when they
Yeah.
come in, if they're in town, they would sit in the room, they would do it. And
Nice.
if I'm in their office and I'm in, Charlotte, North Carolina, I'm sitting in that office doing it from my office in Charlotte. And so it's something that we'll probably execute and implement on a larger scale as we grow. But it is the bigger you get, the harder it gets to do.
Yeah.
Um, because not everybody wants to share. The secret from the boss's seat is this: the more you share about your life with the people in the room, the more they know, like, and trust you, and the more they want to work with you.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, all I'm trying to do is make brothers and sisters and sisters and sisters and, men and women and everybody come together culturally for each other as humans, not just as a job or a role, because that's where you get all the infighting and the cultural discourse. And I think that's something we've navigated quite well over the last almost decade.
That is amazing. I mean, what it sounds like you're doing is you're really trying to build trust up in the organization, and it sounds like you succeeded. And do you find there are, in the different roles of people that you have there? So, I mean, one of the things that, yeah, I think is interesting. So I run this course for doctors, and it's only for doctors. And part of the reason I did that was because there've been leadership programs for every other professional. Nurses have been doing it for 30 years. There've been nothing really for doctors. And America doesn't serve its doctors well in leadership training either. But I wanted to create safe space. So we do a lot of the stuff that you talk about there, but just for doctors, so that they could kind of critique each other, because they're the kind of, in a way, they're the top of the food chain in healthcare. And they do have an extraordinary responsibility that others just don't have, actually. Ultimately the buck, the body stops with them.
Stops there, yeah.
And so it's really been important to do that. Now, there was a lot of pushback. I got a lot of pushback from the National Health Service and others, sort of, oh, it's elitist and crap like that. And actually I persisted, and we've now got amazing data showing that it's really good. I'm not saying that every single leadership program they do has to just be with doctors, but to give them a chance to really, focus on themselves, their problems and everything. So for you, I think it's interesting also to think about the different kinds of employees you have, and whether you notice whether there's differences or whether they are, how similar they are. And it's amazing you've got them all to do this, because some people may have been more cynical about that, I imagine, and some people slightly less so. So,
Well, I think there's two things that are interesting to me about your comments. Number one, doctors are like, if they're not overly confident and willing to put it on the line for themselves, like, they have to carry the insurance, they have to live or die with the surgery, they have to, like,
yeah,
they have to build this ego up that's so large that then they have to be humbled to be a part of a team. It's like Michael Jordan. Michael
yeah,
Jordan is the greatest basketball player, but nobody really loved being Michael Jordan's teammate. In fact, I mean, it's so crazy how his life has not been where people are like, oh, he's the best teammate. No, if they liked winning, he was the best teammate. So if to your example, if someone breaks their leg in our family and we take them to the doctor, I want the best surgeon to be operating on that leg.
Yeah,
But in
exactly.
doing so, in building up these experts, there has to be some level of humility,
Yeah.
and that's nobody's there to give it. And so maybe by creating a community and a safe space for them, they actually will be more willing to be humble, more willing to feel like they're not alone, more willing to, I love that. And I think that that's really important. I think doctors in the financial services industry, it's not my favorite group to work with because doctors and lawyers always know more than everybody else. And so it's very difficult to lead someone when they feel like they would be an expert if they just had more time. So
Yeah. Yeah,
that's
yeah.
not
That's the
expert.
hubris I was talking about. That's exactly the hubris. Exactly.
If I just had more time, I could actually teach the very course, Dr. Goodall, that you're teaching. And I just don't have the time to do it. That's the mentality that
Yeah,
so
yeah.
many analyticals have, and they struggle to open their brain to think
Yeah,
that
yeah.
somebody else could actually teach them something. And
Yeah.
so the second point to your question is this: every one of them's different, and if we don't recognize the individual disparity between all of our employees and how we interact with each other, I pay attention to their body language. They don't know it. Sometimes I don't even come on video. I go on my sauna sometimes and do the call, and I'm not even on video. But I will be there to MC it just so that I can have a moment where I'm working it into my day and it never gets lost. And but I will watch everybody's body language. I will see, is someone into it? Is someone out of it? And if they're not super out of it, I might send them super into it. I might send them a text and say, is everything going all right? Do you need anything? Or I might call or stop in, or, these are ways that I also utilize it to touch point with individuals. And so,
It's
I,
fascinating though. Sorry to interrupt, but I mean,
no,
the idea that, that would have happened kind of, I don't know whether you watch Mad Men or, the fifth.
I loved Mad Men. It was one of
I
my
do. I
favorite
love
shows.
Don Draper. I know it's terrible.
He's amazing. Yeah.
Amazing. Anyway, but I mean I mean, it's what you're describing is quite a new thing, isn't it? I mean, to be that in touch, I mean, it's amazing. It's anathema to the previous generations. Does it work like that at all? And it's so interesting, actually.
Yeah, it's challenging because when you look at most organizations, especially the larger organizations, they actually, the bigger they get, the more they lose the human touch. And so
Yeah.
everything is a task. And when everything's a task, there's no emotion attached to it. And then everybody feels like they're just working for nothing. But
Well, I can
when you
support. I mean, I'm just going to dive in again. That is found in the job satisfaction data. So, and I do talk about that in the book, actually.
yeah,
So, one of the things that we know is that job satisfaction declines in larger organizations. The smaller the organization, the better the job satisfaction. And that's quite important because you can still have a big organization, but if you devolve it enough so that people feel that they have autonomy and they're in a smaller organization, that's the way to kind of do it, because you can't always just work in a small organization. So there are ways around that, but I think you're right. They rarely do that, actually. If anything, they think, let's centralize because it'll be better for costs and we'll save money and blah, blah,
yeah.
blah. And they don't realize that actually what you're doing is you're going to lose a lot of the kind of love that you're going to get for employees when you do that, or at least be careful what you centralize, I guess.
Yeah, and I know why they do it. So the other side is the bigger we became, the more I understood the reasoning behind things, or the more you open yourself up and you invest in a new role for a gap you have in the company, but then workload goes down and productivity goes down instead of up. And so now you have two people doing a job that one person was doing before,
That's
and
fair.
neither are doing the role the
Yeah.
way you need it. And so these things happen and you do become a little cynical the more that you grow in the role. But I also believe that hiring before the need helps not only the company, but it helps the individual that's doing the job right now. Because if they don't get to the point where they're just ready to just throw it all away, you're going to be better off. You're going to have time to recover. You have a backup. Like the investment in the human capital is so much more valuable playing the long game. And I think that so many companies play the short game and
Absolutely.
not the long game. And that's and you talk about that in the book as well.
I do. And that's something that is a major rant point for me, actually, is short-termism. And, let's face it, we live in countries where every 5 years there's a new government in and they're changing everything again. I mean, that is, everything we do. And what was interesting, well, just the quarterly returns, what you really want to assess a company quarterly, 4 times a year. I mean, that's insane. And yet, we do that. I mean, that's insane. And that I think is a real problem. And I think there's lots of other issues that we could talk about in terms of climate, in terms of so many issues because of the short-termism of humans, actually.
Yeah. Well, listen, Dr. Amanda Goodall, I've enjoyed having you on the show. I've enjoyed the conversation. We were able to explore a couple of ideas, and now I'm kind of curious to see if the next book is, instead of The Power of Expert Leaders, credible, maybe it's how the next generation can become an expert leader.
Wow, that's
Maybe that's the next level of
wow.
research, and you could take and build upon what you found, but then add in some generational study to incorporate how to efficiently and effectively bring up the next generation. Because what we want is, we all want that doctor that comes in and, a family member right now is going through a major cancer treatment, and
Sorry.
my wife was in, thank you. And my wife was in the office the other day, and the doctor comes in, and there's like 2 doctors, and there's one that comes in and it's like, there are 5 levels. At number 1 is the mildest. Number 5 is death. We don't want to get a number 5. And she was like, it was so matter of fact. It wasn't bad bedside manner, but it was just like,
cut to the chase.
right. Yeah. But what we all want is, we want a little higher of the EQ with the person that's a communicator, or we want to pair them with great communicators. So that's not a bad idea either. And I think generationally, that's what I think would be really interesting to explore, is where partnerships and joint initiatives in leadership, CEO, COO, doctor he's really the ops person. Even though they're the leader of the role, they're the operations person. But who's the communicator? And does it always have to be the same person?
Well, that's fair. But I will say just quickly that's why in the first module we do with our doctors is about behavior. And it's about behavior, it's about reflection, it's about communication, it's all of that stuff, actually, because I think they are the best people to do that, actually.
Yeah.
It's just that they just need, no one's ever taught them that stuff, right? They go to medical school, no one ever teaches them that stuff. And then when they get into their job, they don't train them in it. So it's like not surprising that they haven't got those skills, but we are giving them those skills. And I think that will expand.
Well, it sounds like you have a lot to learn and a lot to teach and a lot to teach all of us. And where do people find you? How do they find the book? How do they find you? I think you launched a new Instagram channel as well, and I just want to make sure people can find your stuff, right?
Well, no, don't go on Insta, for God's sake, because I started off doing it and then I thought, God, I can't do it. No, LinkedIn, but Amanda or amandagoodall.com. amandagoodall.com. Okay. My website, amandagoodall.com, that's got the book on it, everything, my email, my phone number, my inside leg measurement, anything they want, and they can get in touch with me. I'm very open and very contactable, actually, although, as you know, sometimes I misread emails, but on the whole, I am very approachable. I really am. Yeah, thank you very much as well. I've really enjoyed the conversation a lot, actually.
It's been fascinating.
It's been a hard day today for other reasons, and it's just been a joy, actually.
Yeah, it's always great to have our minds sparked in different directions and kind of think a little bit differently. It does add to the crazy of the day. So I'm grateful for your time. Thank you so much for being a part of the conversation today.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this podcast. If you liked it, there's more where this one came from. Click here and enjoy some more.